The Brown family spent years building a world on the premise that loyalty could get through anything. Fans saw the moves, the marriages, the breakup, and the new beginnings. Through it all, one voice was the loudest. Kody Brown insisted he knew how to lead, how to judge, how to win. He pushed that image so hard that many believed him. Some even admired the confidence. But confidence is fragile when the truth finally steps into the room. This story starts with something simple. A sentence Kody said on camera more times than anyone could count. A line meant to make him look strong. A line he repeated to the point that viewers barely noticed it anymore. He used it to blame, to defend, to justify. He used it to keep control. He never realized it could be used against him. What began as a familiar phrase turned into the very tool that pulled the ground from under him. Because David Woolley, the man who quietly stepped into Christine's life, took that line and put it in front of a judge. And that judge, for the first time in a long time, saw Kody's own words for what they truly were. The shift was instant. One sentence, one courtroom, 1 minute. When the man who spent years trying to control the narrative watched it snap shut around him. Behind the scenes, the fallout hit harder than anyone expected. Kody was shaken. Robin was stunned. The family group chats lit up Christine. She stayed calm in a way only someone who'd already survived the storm could be. After all, this time she wasn't fighting alone. This is the story of how one phrase repeated over a decade became the biggest courtroom defeat of Kody Brown's life. It's a story of pride and proof, about a man who spoke too much for too long, and a story of how David Woolley turned Kody's history into something he never planned on facing. Before the courtroom moment that shook Kody, the shift had already begun. It started quietly, long before lawyers or filings or judges. It began in the small, ordinary moments that stacked up over years. Moments when Christine felt unheard. Moments when the family structure cracked in ways the cameras couldn't disguise anymore. And right in the center of all of it was Kody's mantra. The line he used to defend every decision he made. He said it in the cul-de-sac days. He said it during the big Flagstaff move. He said it in therapy sessions, confessionals, and every argument that ever made it to air. It became predictable, almost automatic. A verbal shield pulled out whenever the conversation got uncomfortable, when the kids questioned him, when the wives pushed back, when the finances tightened, when the relationships collapsed. That phrase kept surfacing like clockwork. And the longer the family lived under the weight of that line, the more obvious it became that it wasn't guidance. It wasn't leadership. It wasn't wisdom. It was control dressed up as principle. For years, Christine carried the impact of it. She heard it used to justify choices that hurt her. She watched it shape the direction of the family in ways she knew were unsustainable. She tried to swallow it, to accept it, to tell herself it came from a good place. But a person can only rationalize so much before the truth forces its way through. By the time she left, the pattern was impossible to ignore. The words no longer stung, they revealed. They told her everything she needed to know about the way the family had been run, and the future she no longer wanted to be part of. He just paid attention to the details Kody had ignored for years, and that included the impact of one sentence Christine told him about almost in passing, a sentence she had stopped thinking about long ago. David didn't forget it. He recognized right away what she had lived through. Not the drama the show portrayed, but the emotional thread beneath it. A thread that tied Kody's words to the choices he made, the consequences he avoided, and the pressure he placed on everyone around him. David didn't rush anything. He waited, he learned, he asked questions. He listened to the kids. He listened to Christine. He paid attention to patterns. He started connecting dots that had been scattered across years of episodes, interviews, and shifting family dynamics. By the time the legal issue surfaced, the one Kody believed he had locked down, David already saw the whole picture. And he saw the hole in Kody's strategy long before Kody realized he had left it open. The very words Kody used to hold the family together were the same words that would tear his legal argument apart, and David was the only one who knew how to use them. The legal trouble didn't start with a dramatic blow-up. It started with something small, a simple dispute that should have been easy to clear up. Kody treated it like a formality, something he could wrap up in a week. He walked in confident, certain the facts were on his side, certain the judge would see him the way he saw himself. But confidence isn't evidence. What Kody didn't know that the moment this issue surfaced, David stepped back and looked at everything. He wasn't trying to start a fight. He wasn't trying to pull Kody apart. He was trying to understand why Christine had been so stressed about money, property, and promises for so many years. It didn't take long for him to see that the story being presented in court didn't match the story told on camera. That alone was interesting. But the real surprise came when David started pulling clips, interviews, and old transcripts. He noticed how often Kody repeated that same line. It wasn't only a phrase, it was a theme, a pattern, the foundation of every decision Kody claimed to make. David watched these moments with fresh eyes. He saw what they revealed about responsibility, intent, and pressure. He saw how Kody presented himself as someone who took charge of the finances, someone who made the rules, someone who insisted he had the authority to allocate money, move money, and control money. The more David watched, the more obvious it became. The case Kody was trying to build in court didn't fit the things he had said publicly for years. If anything, it contradicted them. And that is when David realized the significance of the line Christine had told him about. The line she never thought twice about anymore. The one she had heard so many times that it lost all meaning to her. It was just part of the noise she left behind. To David, it was the missing piece. He didn't rush to share it. He didn't dramatize it. He simply organized everything side by side. Statement next to statement, timeline next to timeline. And once everything was laid out, the truth became hard to ignore. Kody had built his public persona around that phrase. He used it to justify decisions that affected the entire family. He used it to challenge anyone who disagreed. He used it to show he was the one in control. But in the courtroom, he was arguing something entirely different. The judge wasn't looking for drama. The judge was looking for consistency, evidence, logic. And the moment David's compilation was added to the file, there was a noticeable shift. It was the first time Kody realized that his own history wasn't a shield anymore. It was a record. A record that didn't support the version of events he was presenting. He didn't know what David had gathered. He didn't know how clearly it laid out the contradiction. He didn't know that the phrase he had turned into a weapon had finally turned back on him. The only thing he knew was that the tone in the room had changed. It was subtle, a look from the judge, a pause before a question. A shift in posture from the attorneys. That was the moment the first crack appeared in Kody's case. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a soft realization that something wasn't going his way. David didn't celebrate. He didn't comment. He didn't even look at Kody. He just waited. He knew the evidence would speak louder than anything he could say. And it did. The turning point didn't happen in court. It happened in a living room, hours before any filing, long before any attorney got involved. Christine and David were talking about the early days of the show, about how things changed when the family grew and the spotlight grew with it. Christine wasn't venting. She wasn't revisiting old wounds. She was simply answering one of David's questions. He'd asked what argument seemed to repeat the most between her and Kody. She thought for a moment, then said it casually, as if it were obvious. He always used to say, "That is my decision to make." She said it with a shrug. A detail she barely noticed anymore. Just one of the many lines she'd learned to tune out. But the second she said it, something clicked for David. He didn't react, he didn't press her, he just sat back and let her keep talking. He wanted to hear how that one sentence shaped everything else. She explained how it always came up at the worst moments. When she questioned the move to Flagstaff, when she wanted more transparency around money, when she asked why one household got help while another was told to figure it out. Every time things got tense, Kody went back to that line, "That is my decision to make." It wasn't about guidance. It wasn't about family unity. It was a claim of power, a declaration that his word overruled everyone else's. And with every retelling, David saw the pattern more clearly. This wasn't a man struggling to balance a large family. This was a man who wanted the authority without the accountability that came with it. For Christine, that line represented years of confusion and exhaustion. For David, it was something completely different. He recognized it immediately as a public contradiction, waiting to be exposed. If a man spends years publicly insisting he makes the big decisions, then suddenly argues in court that he wasn't responsible for those same decisions, the inconsistency becomes impossible to ignore. Owned sentence, won habit. one repeated claim, Christine, had lived under the weight of that line for years, but in a legal setting, that line didn't intimidate anyone, it didn't control anyone, it didn't justify anything, it revealed everything. David didn't say any of this out loud, he didn't want to overwhelm her. He didn't want to make her feel like her past was being turned into a strategy. Instead, he asked her when she first noticed it. He asked how the kids reacted to it. He asked how it showed up in finances, in buildings, in moves, in promises. Christine answered honestly, not realizing she was outlining the entire map of the argument Kody would soon regret making. David had spent his life running businesses, managing contracts, understanding how responsibility is defined on paper versus how people try to present it in real life. And as Christine talked, he saw something she never needed to see. He saw the legal thread. He saw how one phrase repeated on national television for years created a clear record of self-declared authority. Something Kody had never imagined could be used against him, because he had no reason to believe he'd ever be challenged by someone who knew how to read that pattern for what it was. Christine finished her story. David nodded and smiled at her. Then he excused himself for a moment, walked down the hall, and pulled up an old episode on his phone. 15 minutes in, there it was. The exact same line she had just quoted. He checked another episode and another. And another. It wasn't rare. It wasn't random. It was Kody's signature. That was the moment David understood something. Kody didn't. A phrase meant to control a family might hold up inside a living room, but in court that same phrase could dismantle every argument built on denial. David didn't need to win a battle with Kody. He wasn't looking for one. All he needed was the truth, and Kody had willingly recorded years of it for the world to see. The next shift happened in a quiet conference room. No cameras, no audience, just papers, laptops, and the low buzz of fluorescent lights. Kody walked in like he always did, convinced the case would go his way. He carried himself the same way he did on set, shoulders back, voice steady, ready to talk his way through anything. But this wasn't a production meeting. There were no producers waiting to shape his words into a storyline. There were no wives sitting nearby, forced to nod along or fall silent. This time, he wasn't managing a conversation. He was being evaluated by people who didn't care about his charm or his confidence. They cared about facts. They cared about what could be proven. They cared about what he had said on record, not what he claimed to mean by it. From the moment Kody started speaking, his attorney took notes in a way that made him uneasy. They asked him to clarify timelines he had repeated on television dozens of times. They asked him to explain why he had made certain choices. They asked him who actually approved the money decisions he kept denying in court. And every time Kody gave an answer, they paused. Not long pauses. Barely noticeable, but just long enough to signal that something wasn't lining up. They weren't trying to intimidate him. They were trying to understand why his statements in this legal matter didn't match the statements he had made in years of public footage. They had seen the pattern David already understood. It wasn't what Kody was saying now. And the more they pressed, the more defensive he became. He kept repeating the same lines. He kept insisting his intentions were misunderstood. He kept trying to explain the meaning behind his words instead of owning the words themselves. Intentions don't erase the record. One of the attorneys finally asked him a question that made the room fall quiet. Did you or did you not say, on multiple occasions, that these decisions were yours alone to make? Kody shifted in his chair. He tried to reframe the context. He tried to argue that the show had edited his meaning. He tried to point the blame somewhere else. But the attorney cut him off gently. We aren't talking about editing. We're talking about your words. He didn't have an answer that helped him. The problem wasn't the show. The problem wasn't the wives. The problem wasn't the storyline. The problem was consistency, and he didn't have it. For the first time since the case began, his attorney leaned back in their chair, closed their notebook, and looked at him with a hint of concern. A concern Kody couldn't ignore anymore. Someone had brought those clips forward. Someone understood how they contradicted his claims. Someone had used his own narrative to expose the gap in his defense. It didn't take long for Kody to guess who did it. Christine wouldn't have gone through years of footage. The kids wouldn't have coordinated something like that. And only one man had the steadfast patience to watch it all without emotion and connect every dot. David. The thought struck Kody like a sledgehammer. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shock. It was something he rarely felt. Something he hated, feeling vulnerability for the first time in a very long time. He grasped that he didn't have the advantage. Someone had prepared him. Someone had studied him. Someone who doesn't carry the fear or hesitation the wives once did. Someone who doesn't back down. And it wasn't because David wanted a fight. It was because he wanted the truth to be honored, even if it meant engaging with the man who built an entire identity on avoiding accountability. The attorneys didn't say it, but Kody saw it in their faces. His own words were becoming a liability, and the case was no longer in his control. As the legal pressure tightened, one specific video clip began circulating behind the scenes. It wasn't leaked, it wasn't publicized, it was quietly pulled by one of the attorneys and placed into the case file, because it illustrated the exact contradiction that had started making Kody's defense collapse. It was a moment from a past season, a simple family discussion that had seemed forgettable at the time. Nothing explosive, nothing dramatic, no yelling, no tears. Just a routine conversation between Kody and the wives, about a decision he wanted them to accept without question. The topic wasn't even important, but the tone was. The clip showed him sitting at the head of the table while the wives asked valid questions. He shut them down. He repeated the same line he had used for years. "I'm the one making the call." That was it, 6 words, said clearly, not edited, not taken out of context. And in the footage, you could see the reaction on everyone's faces. Janelle's discomfort, Mary's silence, Christine's frustration rising and falling as she tried to stay calm. It was the perfect example of how decisions were handled in the family for years. What Kody never expected was that those 6 words would become a legal pivot point. His attorney showed him the clip during a meeting. They paused it halfway through and looked at him, hoping he'd give them something. Some explanation that might help them reconcile this moment with the position he was taking in court. But Kody didn't say anything. He just stared at the paused screen. He had seen that episode dozens of times. He knew how he presented himself back then. He had believed that confidence made him look strong and decisive. He didn't realize how it would look years later when the same line contradicted almost every statement he was making in his own defense. What made it worse was how calmly he said it. There was no stress in his voice, no hesitation. It wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a habit. Control disguised as leadership. Authority disguised as responsibility. Confidence disguised as absolute power. The attorney replayed the clip from the beginning. Then, again, and once more. By the 3rd time, Kody couldn't look at the screen anymore. The clip didn't prove everything, but it proved enough. It showed a pattern, it showed intention, it showed exactly what David had noticed when Christine told her story in their living room. This wasn't accidental, this wasn't misunderstood. This was Kody repeating the same claim for years on camera, in front of millions of viewers and his entire family. And now it was coming back to him in the one place where the tone didn't matter. The context didn't matter, the excuses didn't matter. Only the words mattered. The attorneys kept the clip short, precise and impossible to dispute. Kody felt the weight of it. People had called him controlling before, but it had always been a matter of opinion. Now it was a matter of record. He thought about blaming the editors again. He thought about claiming the show twisted things. But it wouldn't work. Not this time. Not when the clip showed him speaking without stress or manipulation. He didn't look like a man under pressure. He looked like a man in charge. In charge. And, for the first time in the process, he realized something he had never considered. His biggest opponent wasn't Christine. It wasn't the court. It wasn't the attorneys. It was his own public identity. The one he had built with confidence, repetition, and certainty. The identity David had quietly documented, piece by piece, until the entire defense began to unravel. While Kody was busy reacting to every twist in the case, David was doing something completely different. He stayed calm. He stayed steady. He didn't argue. He didn't throw accusations. He didn't try to match Kody's energy or prove himself through emotion. He approached the entire situation like someone who had seen enough real-world conflict to know one simple truth. Whoever stays grounded wins the long fight. What made his approach so effective wasn't aggression. It was the complete lack of it. He never raised his voice. He never tried to provoke Kody. He never made himself part of the story. He simply watched, listened, and took notes when needed. The same way someone with experience in contracts and negotiations handles a situation that's headed toward a dispute. He wasn't preparing for a court battle. He was preparing to expose the truth in a way Kody couldn't spin. What surprised the attorneys most, however, was how thorough David was. While Kody was jumping between contradictions and emotional explanations, David had already organized everything into a timeline that made sense. He laid out clips, dates, decisions, and financial shifts in neat, simple categories. Nothing messy, nothing dramatic, and the pattern was clear. The more the timeline grew, the harder it became for anyone to deny how many major choices traced directly back to Kody. Decisions about money, housing, moves, commitments, promises, each one tied to a specific moment on camera where he repeated the same claim. My call, my decision. My responsibility, my vision. Kody had meant those statements as a show of leadership, but now, placed back. Too back, they became something different. They showed control, they showed awareness, they showed intention. It was the one thing Kody never prepared for, someone who could connect every scattered moment into one coherent story. And it wasn't Christine doing this. It wasn't an attorney. It wasn't a producer digging through archives. It was David, quiet, steady, patient. A man with no need for attention. A man who didn't care about the old drama. A man who simply wanted transparency for the woman he loved. The attorneys respected him for that. They didn't say it outright, but their reaction made it clear. Most people come into these cases emotional, reactive, or focused on punishment. But here was someone approaching everything with clarity. He wasn't trying to tear Kody apart. He was trying to make the truth impossible to ignore. And that made him the one person in this entire situation Kody didn't know how to handle. You can confront a former wife. You can negotiate with an attorney. You can charm an audience. But David didn't fit any of those categories. He didn't back down. He didn't blow up. He didn't crumble under pressure. He simply kept pulling the thread that Kody never expected anyone to notice. By the end of the meeting, one thing was clear: this wasn't Christine versus Kody anymore. This was Kody's past finally catching up to him, guided by someone who understood how to turn a pattern into proof. And the more the truth emerged, the smaller Kody's world of explanations became. Around this time, Kody convinced himself the real problem wasn't the evidence. It wasn't the contradictions. It wasn't the episodes being dissected. He believed the issue was perception. If people would just understand what he meant over the years, everything would smooth out. So he did what he always did when things felt out of control. He tried to force a conversation. He called Christine, not to apologize, not to clarify anything, but to reset the narrative, as he put it. Christine didn't argue. She didn't shut him down. She simply agreed to talk. She met him on neutral ground and brought the calm that had taken her years to earn. But before she could even sit down, he launched into a speech. According to him, the family had misunderstood his tone. The public had misunderstood his intentions. The attorneys didn't see the full story. He kept insisting the footage looked harsher than it felt. He called it selective editing. He called it television exaggeration. He called it the wives turning small moments into bigger ones. He said everything except what the attorneys needed him to acknowledge. His own words. Christine let him talk. She didn't interrupt. She didn't push back. When he finally paused, she asked one simple question. Do you think everyone misunderstood you every single time for years? Kody froze. It wasn't meant to be confrontational, it was just a question, but he didn't have a clean answer. He hesitated, then started explaining how he had carried the burden of leadership alone. He said he had tried to protect the family from chaos. He said he had taken responsibility because no one else would. But responsibility wasn't the problem. The problem was ownership without accountability. And deep down, he knew that. Christine stayed calm. She didn't argue any of his points. Instead, she reminded him of something he didn't expect her to bring up. The same line she had told David weeks earlier, the one that started this entire shift. You used to tell us, that's my decision to make. You said it all the time, we didn't imagine that. Kody's jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. He couldn't deny it, because there it was, recorded, documented, repeated for years. He tried to soften it, saying he meant it as guidance, not dominance, but Christine shook her head, not in anger. In sadness, that line didn't guide us, it shut us down. That was the moment he realized the ground was shifting under him again. This wasn't the Christine he used to debate with. This wasn't the woman who once tried to justify and rationalize every disappointment. This was someone who had rebuilt herself, someone who saw the dynamic clearly, without emotion clouding it, someone he could no longer control, and that's when it hit him. The reason his words were blowing up in court wasn't because of editing or perception, it was because those words represented who he truly was in those moments. And Christine wasn't the only one who saw it now. David did, the attorneys did, the court did, even the audience did. Kody tried shifting the conversation again, tried reframing the past, tried insisting that people were twisting his meaning. But Christine simply shook her head and said something he wasn't ready to hear. You built the image you're running from. There was no yelling, no dramatic exit, no accusations, just truth delivered calmly without fear. And for the first time, Kody had no comeback. He walked away realizing something he'd avoided for years. The story he used to control was no longer his to spin. David wasn't attacking him, Christine wasn't plotting against him. The attorneys weren't out to get him. The problem was simpler. The truth finally had structure. And it was closing in by the time the case reached its next hearing, the atmosphere around it had completely changed. What started as a messy emotional dispute had shifted into something much more structured. The court wasn't sorting through feelings anymore. They were sorting through evidence. And that's where everything tilted. The judge came in prepared. They had watched the clips. They had reviewed the transcripts. They had read the statements. And almost immediately, they noticed the same pattern David had picked up weeks earlier. Kody's testimony didn't match his own record. Not because of exaggeration. Not because of editing. Not because of misunderstandings. Because the words were clear. The first time the judge paused the discussion to ask him a direct question, you could feel the shift in the room. Mr. Brown, you've stated under oath that these decisions were shared, but we have multiple documented instances where you explicitly say the opposite. How do you reconcile that? Kody reacted the way he always did when pressed. He talked fast. He jumped between explanations. He shifted blame toward context, cameras, and emotions. But the judge didn't let him wander. They kept bringing him back, always to the same point, his own words. What made this difficult for Kody wasn't the legal system. It was the fact that the courtroom treated his statements like data, not drama on television. His tone carried weight. In the family, his authority went unchallenged. In interviews, his confidence shaped the narrative. But in court, tone didn't matter, intent didn't matter, reputation didn't matter, only the words mattered. And the judge noticed every contradiction that came up when those words were placed beside reality. At one point, the judge asked him if he remembered a specific comment he made in an episode several years back. Kody said no. The judge read it aloud from the transcript, the same decisive line that kept coming up. I'm the one making the call. The courtroom fell silent. Kody stared down. The attorneys exchanged looks. It wasn't the statement itself that hurt him. It was the accumulation. One contradiction can be brushed off. 2 can be explained. 3 can be reframed, but 10, 12, across years, across major family and financial turning points. That wasn't misunderstanding, that wasn't editing. That was a documented pattern of decision making. And for the first time, the judge addressed it directly. Mr. Brown, you can't claim leadership when it benefits you and deny responsibility when it doesn't. That line hit Kody harder than anything said so far. He tried to respond, but the judge moved on. The court wasn't trying to attack him, they simply had more clarity than they did before, and that clarity didn't come from Christine's testimony. It came from David's timeline, the quiet, meticulous effort he had put into, laying out years of statements, had reshaped the entire case. Not by attacking Kody, not by dramatizing anything, but by making sure the judge saw the reality behind the show, facts over feelings, patterns over excuses, consistency over charisma. It wasn't about painting Kody as a villain, it was about holding him to the words he had chosen to represent himself for over a decade. By the end of the hearing, the judge wasn't looking at the case as a family disagreement anymore. They were treating it as a matter of accountability, and Kody knew it. The attorneys knew it. David knew it. Christine didn't celebrate, she didn't smile. She didn't look triumphant. She just looked relieved. She wasn't trying to win anything. She just wanted clarity. And for the first time, the court was giving her exactly that. After the hearing, Kody retired to his private quarters. The house felt heavier than usual. Even his closest allies noticed a tension in his steps, the way he avoided eye contact, the way he replayed the words of the judge over and over in his mind: my call, my decision, my responsibility. Every phrase was like a drumbeat of accountability. The clips, the transcripts, and testimony weren't just piling up. They were developing a pattern impossible to ignore. For the first time, Kody realized his usual tactics wouldn't work. No charm, no bluster, no deflection. David had done something he never could have anticipated. He had weaponized consistency. Every episode, every statement, every seemingly harmless comment Kody had made over the years now worked against him. The words that once reinforced his image of authority and control now painted him as unyielding, unilateral, and unwilling to consider anyone else's input. Kody called his attorneys. He wanted solutions. He asked if there was some way of reframing the narrative, but the answer was the same: not this time. The lawyers described the central issue. In the past, Kody had benefited from a lack of documentation. Memories faded, opinions varied, testimonies conflicted. But David had centralized everything, every moment, every line, every pattern. It wasn't possible to dispute. Even Kody's own defenses, claims of misunderstanding, selective editing, or context, fell apart under the weight of chronological precision. For each rebuttal he tried to craft, there was another piece of evidence, another clip, another date. The most shocking realization for Kody came when he reviewed one of David's compilations. It wasn't edited for emotion. There was no dramatic music, no voiceover, no attempts to manipulate perception. It was raw, factual, chronological, just facts. And the facts didn't lie. The timeline clearly showed instances of Kody ignoring wives' objections, instances when he made decisions on his own without consulting anyone, times when his words on camera directly contradicted his claims in court, repetition of phrases like, "I am the one making the call," "This is my decision, and I know what is best for the family." The pattern was undeniable. Even his defenders struggled to defend him. The contradictions weren't accidental. They were systemic, embedded in years of decisions and statements, and David had methodically captured every single one of them. Kody realized something very important. No amount of charisma or explanation could take away decades of his own documented behavior. The words, once meant to command authority, had become the chains binding him in court. For the first time, he realized the severity of his situation. This wasn't just a setback. This wasn't just a challenge. This was a complete exposure of his decision-making, his authority, and his leadership. It had all been orchestrated quietly, strategically, and without drama by David. Kody leaned back, eyeing the compiled documents, clips, and spreadsheets. It was then that it hit him like a tidal wave. The magnitude of such a situation. His carefully built image, which he had consistently used for protection over the years, was now the very instrument that could tear down his case. The courtroom was silent. Every eye was on Kody as final bits of evidence were brought forward. David's work had come full circle. Every clip, every line, every documented decision stacked neatly in chronological order. The judge didn't need persuasion, just facts, and the facts were undeniable. In his own words, the ones he had used to project leadership and control for years now reflected a pattern of unilateral decisions, broken promises, and disregard for the other wives' input. The very phrases that once reinforced his authority, such as, "This is my decision," "I know what is best for the family," and "I am the one making the call," were now the pillars of his defeat. He attempted to answer, he tried to rephrase, he tried to explain context, but the court saw what David had known all along. Context didn't erase repetition. It didn't erase decisions made without consultation. it didn't erase the pattern. The judge spoke directly to Kody, his calm but firm voice filling the room. "Mr. Brown, these are your words, your statements, your decisions. The evidence shows a consistent pattern. You can't claim misunderstanding or selective memory. This is the reality you created." In real time, the defenses of Kody crumbled. He realized that charisma, charm, and years of carefully constructed public persona meant nothing here. Every word he had spoken in confidence, every line meant to assert his control, every claim of vision now served as documented proof of unilateral decision-making and negligence. Outside the courtroom, the family watched. Some felt relief, some felt vindication, but all understood the magnitude of what had happened. Kody's empire of words, his carefully curated image, had finally turned on him. David did not gloat. He did not celebrate. He merely made sure the truth was visible, inescapable. That steady, quiet work had turned what once seemed like a family spat into a formal unmasking of accountability. And, as the judge summarized the case, one thing was clear: Kody's words were no longer a shield. They were the evidence that defined his responsibility and cemented the court ruling. The story he had used for years to hold on to control and command had been carefully taken apart. And in that moment, the reality was stark. The king of his own carefully crafted kingdom of words had no defense left. What once were his words of protection had now become the most damning proof of all: his decisions, his words, and his authority. All of it faced the unbearable lightness of truth. The final chapter in this saga was not written by drama or emotion. It was written by methodical evidence, quiet strategy, and undeniable fact. It served as a cautionary tale to all those who believed words alone could shield them from accountability. The courtroom cleared, cameras stopped rolling, lights were dimmed, but one truth remained indelible. Kody's words, his own creation, had become his biggest court defeat yet. The story of control, authority, and illusion was over. The reality of accountability had begun, and for the first time in years, the truth was clear. He no longer commanded the kingdom he thought he had built. It was David's quiet, steadfast pursuit of clarity that ensured the final reckoning. The echoes of Kody's own words would forever remind the world: the pen and the voice can build empires, but they can also dismantle them.